Oh, mic check.
You're here.
I'm here.
I'm just giving it the full minute here, waiting for people to show up.
Oh, we're not on the air now?
We are. We are live, Jim. So
Oh,
no embarrassing hot mic moments from you.
I was about to really go off.
No, please do, Jim. Tell us all what's on your mind.
No.
We'll wait for the article.
Well, we've got the full minute under our belt here, so I guess we can go ahead and get going. For those who are here, perhaps you already know who we are, but for those listening to the recording later, this is CASAA's Twitter Spaces, live, unfiltered. And if you don't know much about CASAA, I encourage you to check out our website. That's CASAA.org, CASAA.org. We are the Consumer Advocates for Smoke-Free Alternatives Association. And tonight we have an all board member panel, Matt Cully, Jim McDonald, Logan Evans, and our illustrious board president, Danielle Jones. And we are gathered together here tonight to talk about bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
I can hear the roar of applause. And so I don't know if it's best for me to kick this off or not, but I will confess I actually had to do a little bit of Googling and reading and all of that beforehand because for the most part, because of my situation, I sort of take bodily autonomy for granted, and I can't say I've ever really been challenged that hard to think about it. So perhaps it's best for me to pass the mic.
Well, it's a human right, I guess, first and foremost. Bodily autonomy, for people who are curious, is really, the sovereignty over your own body in regards to sexuality, reproductive rights, drug use, all of those things pertaining your own personal being, as long as those choices, those freedoms do not affect the autonomy of others in negative ways. And I guess that's kind of the broad definition, really, of bodily autonomy. It's also referred to as personal autonomy. It is covered in some sense, in the Constitution in regards to personal privacy and ownership. I forget which amendment that is, but although it is not stated explicitly in the Constitution in any way, it's been interpreted as such through a number of cases. One of those cases being Roe v. Wade, and there's another one here. Griswold versus Connecticut, I believe, was another defining moment for personal autonomy. So yeah, even though it's not laid out in the Constitution, verbatim, the right to bodily autonomy is there. And also, I guess,
let me just jump in real quick, just on your point, Logan. A lot of it stems from the 14th Amendment, and it was written originally because for the slaves, because they had their bodily autonomy stripped away. They had forced pregnancies, forced marriages,
exactly,
so on and so forth. And so that's why that amendment was written, to be so broad and cover a lot of different sub categories of bodily autonomy.
Yeah, thank you. Once we get past the first 10, I get the numbers real bad. I mix them all up real bad. That's just my squirrel brain. But yeah, that is where it is covered. It's it's a human right, it's an inalienable right. In regards to drug use, I don't, it's not necessarily stated anywhere, but if people are curious about, human rights and drug policy, there are international guidelines on human rights and drug policy. and these were, agreed upon, written, and set forth by the International Center on Human Rights and Drug Policy, the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner, the World Health Organization, UNDP. And so really they talk about the foundational human rights principles like human dignity. The universal human dignity is a fundamental principle of human rights. It is from the inherent dignity of the human person that our rights derive. No drug law, policy, or practice. I'm literally reading from this. There's just a few key points, and I'm going to share this as well in our Twitter thread for people to read through. No drug law, policy, or practice should have the effect of undermining or violating the dignity of any person, group, or persons, which that is undermined regularly every day around the world. A person's involvement in drug-related criminality affects the enjoyment of some rights and specifically engages in others. All persons have the right to equality and freedom from discrimination. This means that all are equal before the law and are entitled to equal protection and benefit from the law, including the enjoyment of all human rights without discrimination on a range of grounds, such as health status, which includes drug dependence. That right is violated regularly around the world.
Well, that's where it gets interesting is with drugs, because while we've seen a lot of, major Supreme Court cases on other things, I want to say people have challenged it before, saying that drugs should be, part of bodily autonomy, but there isn't any landmark cases to point to.
Well,
But it makes
it's more of the case of, we don't often, and in some countries it is illegal to even have drugs in your system, you know, without without any additional criminal activity or whatever being lumped in there. But for the most part, um, we criminalize the possession, we criminalize the sale, the manufacture, and we kind of dance around it, and we use those laws, in conjunction with each other to essentially violate those human rights of people.
So just to jump in here and maybe do a little devil's advocate here, with in particular with drugs, I think one of the principles or one of the things that you talked about at the beginning and sort of setting up the definition of bodily autonomy is, it's the idea that you have the control over your own body, what you put into it, the activities you do, as long as it isn't harming another person. And so where when we start talking about drugs, it seems that, first of all, we've identified the wrong boogeyman here. Like, society justifies all of the punishment and taking away people's bodily autonomy, related to drugs, because the drugs themselves are injuring society. They're addicting the children. They're making people poor and stupid and all of these things. So, and we've seen that, of course, that same strategy used on tobacco. This is why we have indoor and outdoor place bans and all of the stigma heaped upon people who smoke. It's not so much, making that choice to smoke a cigarette or use any tobacco product in the eyes of society is not your choice anymore, because everyone believes that it's harming the people around you. So I guess I throw that out there as sort of the devil's advocate, and I know the answers to most of this stuff, and I think I already kind of answered my own question.
Well,
that's a horrible.
That's like
you get the gist of it.
Where's the line at, of harming others? I could say that if I eat 5,000 calories of food a day and I get really fat, I'm going to harm the people I'm around, because I'm going to be, dying earlier and be obviously less healthy. So it's like, where's the line drawn at as far as affecting others?
Can I jump in a second and do a little more devil's advocacy?
Devil's advocacy.
The term bodily autonomy or personal autonomy is nowhere in the Constitution. So anytime it's been applied, and we've named a few of them here, it's an interpretation by the justices of existing constitutional writing. So the 14th Amendment doesn't talk about autonomy. It says that the state can't deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process. And the Ninth Amendment says all rights that are not enumerated in the Constitution belong to the people. But all of these things have to be made concrete with law for them to have an effect. And Logan, when you say it's a human right, that's that's just your opinion, man. Because I mean, there is no universal human right that's recognized by every state and every government.
No, no, which is what, guidelines by these international organizations set out to do, with hundreds of countries around the world signing on. Obviously, around the world, there are going to be outlying countries that don't agree with this, or what have you.
Well, in the
But
case
we're talking about a consensus
in
more
the
than
case of the
anything. I
World
mean,
Health Organization, they don't even agree with their own statement. So,
Well, see, like, while you're right, Jim, it is vague. I think, we've had plenty of Supreme Court rulings based on the essence of the law. Even the so-called originalists will still, rule based on the essence of the law and back those laws up if they're ones they like. They
yeah,
tend to only be originalists when it's a law they don't like that they want to get rid of.
well,
But like that, if I think that common sense can take you there, though, to bodily autonomy with the way that the 14th is written, and like you had mentioned, the ninth. Like, if they are going to say that the 14th, for example, it's not, obviously not only Roe v. Wade, but also contraception was once illegal in many states,
yeah,
and they use the 14th to say that everyone has the right to use contraception, and so
that that was
it's
first.
not that
That was
it's
Griswold.
not that far away to get to from there. It's not that far away to get to the drug issue.
Okay, so let's before we get to the drug issue, let's look at what's happening now, where they're about to reverse Roe and say that the 14th Amendment doesn't apply, which could also lead to reversing Griswold, which is um,
Yeah, and
contraception
that's what's scary. It could lead to reversing gay marriage even.
or interracial marriage.
Yeah, there's a
All these
lot
were
of
based on the same vague 14th Amendment stuff. So, um,
I agree. That's the slippery slope.
we're looking forward to drugs being protected under bodily autonomy when in fact we could be losing all the existing stuff that is.
And I think Jim makes a good point too, that the problem with this issue is interpretation, right? That it's not codified anywhere. So we see, it embraced in certain ways the concept of bodily autonomy. If you consider, in the medical field, for example, organ donation, right? Like you have to, there are so many ethical and strict guidelines around that you can't be paid or you can't be coerced and it has to be voluntary, right? Your wishes after death, for example, have the full, legal weight of the entire, United States in terms of what you want. Refusing medical care, do not resuscitate orders. Like all of these very staunchly support the concept of bodily autonomy. But then you also get into areas where it gets more gray or it's left up to interpretation. And we know that from things like what Alex talked about, smoking, vaping, drug use, all of these different things. And so this is where we find ourselves, right? Because it's left up to interpretation. It depends on largely who's in power to sort of, say yes or no to these things. And I think that's sort of the crux of what we're getting at with this conversation.
Correct. And the other side of the bodily autonomy part of the equation is whether the state has an interest in preventing you from doing something that you think falls under bodily autonomy. So, and that's where, as Alex said, that's how they justify smoking bans. Well, you're hurting other people, so you don't have that right anymore. So,
and how many of those laws have been put into place on based on poor science or poor evidence or a lack thereof,
that is
or
point. It's
simple
if
opinions.
you have the
And
power to
it's
get
not
it
to,
done, if you have the
in the
power,
subject of smoking, particularly when we're talking about autonomy, and it negatively affecting other people, which it can after decades of living in the same house or in close proximity to somebody heavily smoking or something like that. That's
you're
what the
missing.
evidence shows.
Logan, I'm not arguing for those laws. I'm saying that's how people justify taking away your bodily autonomy.
Sure,
They
sure.
say the state has an abiding interest in preventing that
I mean,
because
yeah, it's the centuries old debate of weighing the importance of the community versus the importance of the individual.
correct.
And that's, and that's why we've seen various different political ideologies form around that, because people differ so much. Obviously, libertarians are way far to the person, and then communists are completely opposite to the community. So, trying to balance those two is always a chore, and figuring out where those invisible lines should be drawn.
It is interesting in regards to the harming of other people and the way that some folks see this and then argue for it or against it. One of the things that comes to mind for me is people who are pro drug war in regards to saying things like we need to clean up the streets. There are needles everywhere. There's paraphernalia. This is my child could pick up a needle, contract Hep C or something like this. But then also turn around and they are not in favor of safe injection sites or needle exchange programs, which would, greatly solve or greatly reduce those exact same things. And so there's, when we get into these different sides and people's opinions, I think this is where public education is the most necessary, in engaging with communities and kind of setting those myths or those ideas straight.
Well, yeah, and I think another interesting question to ask people, and something even I think about with myself sometimes, is like, would we be more, not just us in this group, but society in general, would we be more okay with the war on drugs if it actually had worked? You know what I'm saying? We tend to be, one of the big arguments is the war on drugs has not worked. In fact, it's made everything worse. But then, if it's all about bodily autonomy, regardless of whether the war on drugs helped society or not, we should be against it, because they're still, dictating policy or about what we do with our own bodies.
I think that much of the most successful argument against the drug war is not bodily autonomy at all, but the fact that they created a carceral crisis.
Agreed, and you're right. It's yeah, everything that came from it. I mean, the drug problems are there's the overdose problems are worse than they've ever been. There's mass incarceration. There's crime that comes from it. But if none of those things existed, then I sure we'd see a big portion of people, even those that consider themselves libertarian types, that they would be pro drug war, because we tend to kind of, our opinions and our ideology can be fluid depending on what we see with our own two eyes. I guess, like, if something seemed like it worked and it was a benefit, then you're willing to kind of bend your ideology for it.
I think everybody thinks that they're taking positions based on what they see with their own two eyes, when in reality, almost everybody is absorbing facts through the filter of the news media, which tends to um, support the general political consensus. So
I agree. My only point is that these bodily autonomy issues tend to not be as controversial if it's something that, like, people think was a net good.
yeah,
Like, we're willing to give up rights when we think it's a net benefit for society or for ourselves.
I mean, I think it'd be a benefit to everybody who's thinking about this stuff to look at all the issues of bodily autonomy and ask themselves, do I really support bodily autonomy because I don't support this? Or this makes me uncomfortable, or because there's a lot of different things that fall under that rubric, bodily autonomy, that I don't know how many people we'd find that are really truly libertarians. I'm not a libertarian, by the way, but I am socially libertarian. I don't think I support the free use of drugs, and doing with your own body as you please.
But I think you make a good point, Jim, because, obviously our community, right, is primarily the vaping community and the tobacco harm reduction community. And I think people within this community are very, it is a no-brain question to say that we have the right to vape, right? We have the right to tobacco harm reduction, to reduce risk products. We have the right to consume nicotine, and we have the right to do it in the safest way possible, right? There's
Right.
no, everybody in this group, in this chat, listening to this probably agrees with that, all the members of CASAA. But when we talk about the larger issue of bodily autonomy, when we start applying that same principle in other areas, I think you're right. That's the test, right? Like, do you really understand what bodily autonomy and what freedom of choice is? And can you say that you approve of it or support it in all regards? I can give a personal example, if you guys are interested. The concept of vaccine mandates, right? That's been a hot button topic lately. I am somebody who very staunchly supports bodily autonomy. And for me, depending on how you define mandate, because that's a key, point in this argument, my body, my choice means everything for the most part, right? With the caveat that it doesn't hurt other people. So that gets dicey, because would I support somebody who absolutely does not want to be injected with a substance? Would I support forcing them to have that done, even though it would be probably better for society, right? That's a question. And so
You would
for
have
me,
to essentially, like, at that point you're talking about any and all vaccines as well. You're talking about flu shots, you're talking about all of that.
right,
um,
exactly. And that is a
because
much larger issue.
Well, wait a
because
minute.
then you have
Nobody.
to get into the transmission of anything that there is a vaccine for, if it can be transferred from human to human.
What? Wait.
Yeah, I mean that's because
So
when you
the
go down that road, you can't just keep that road focused on COVID.
No,
Well,
I agree with that exactly, because I think
societies have,
most of us in society has not really had a problem in the past, up until recently, with, and I say majority, that's not everybody, but majority is okay getting, having their kid get the measles vaccine so that they can attend kindergarten or what have you, right? Like, that hasn't been a huge wedge issue in the past. But more recently now, it has been an issue. There are people that do not want to get the COVID vaccine. And so if you bring it back to bodily autonomy, what's the right answer here?
Okay. So first of all, vaccine, and especially with children, has been an issue for a long time. There have always been
Yeah,
anti-vaxxers.
there's always been anti-vaxxers in regards to whether or not. I mean, there's a
The
community
thing
at
is,
Right, but
large.
they
nobody,
haven't been the majority. That's
nobody,
yeah,
been a
it's,
vocal minority.
they're still not
yeah.
the majority. So there's still a minority, even with
Yeah.
COVID.
Well, I think that, again, I think that people will throw out their ideology when, like, society is reactionary. So, for example, you have a lot of people that were probably pretty libertarian on social issues that then were for a vax mandate because, usually you're willing to, like, go against your ideology when there's fear or like a near and present danger that's what we see. Doesn't I'm not saying that it's okay. I'm just saying I think that's why these issues start to become really gray. And I have a hard time just coercing anybody into, like, putting any kind of shot into their body. I know that, like, there's a difference between a mandate where, like, the government's just forcing everybody to do it, or like you're going to go to prison if not.
Like in
um, yeah, there's a difference between that and telling them, hey, if you want to go to school or if you want to work this job, you got to get the vaccine, but it is still coercion. So it's such a tough one.
So here's the thing with that coercion. Is it the government doing it, or is it a private interest? So if an airline tells me I can't fly without a vaccine, I have no argument.
Yeah, I think that's different. I definitely think it's different when it's private. Because then you're talking about their rights as a company, and if they they have a certain set of rights, I guess, as
And
well.
yet we've got people like Ron DeSantis, who is supposed to be the small government conservative.
Isn't it illegal for private businesses to deny, employment based on health statuses and such like that? So wouldn't that be illegal to deny someone?
No, I think there are exceptions to that.
Like
It's
you
illegal
couldn't
to deny them based on
like if they're pregnant, or like they
right,
have some kind of like medical disease or something, they have HIV or something like that.
something that
But
is transmissible through the air or through
Yeah.
some. But so Ron DeSantis went a step further than saying businesses don't have to force you to wear a mask to come in. He said they're not allowed to.
yeah, that's where the populism of the right is kind of peaking its head up. They're a
That's
little bit
true.
less on with the conservative stuff lately, and we're seeing that locally where I'm at too, where you have this group of people, and on one hand, they're freaking out right now at the school system because they want to have more of a say in what is being taught at the schools. But then on
Right.
the other hand, they're lobbying these library trustees, which are government appointed trustees, to ban books from the library. They want the government to ban books, and it's like, so you want the free, you want to have the freedom of choice when it comes to the schools, but you don't want people to have the freedom of choice when it comes to our libraries. It's just, it's
Right.
weird, and but you know what, the left is hypocritical on this issue as well, where they prop up autonomy when it comes to some issues, and freedom and liberty, but then on others they're not so good at it.
Everybody's bad, I'm telling you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say everybody is bad. The right is very, freedom, freedom, freedom until it's not the freedom that they believe in, and
Right.
the left can be very, very autonomy until it comes to, well, this drug is okay, but these are still bad drugs, and this is okay, but
Yeah, the left has some of the old school progressive movement still built into them, where it's where the whole nanny state stuff comes from, to
Right.
trying to regulate soda sizes and bullshit like that, like we saw in New York. Like that's where the left has their tendencies, where they want to basically save you from yourself.
So this all goes back to Cicero, the Roman philosopher, who said, the health of the people is the highest law. The idea that public health trumps everything.
Yeah, and that's definitely kind of like a progressive movement sort of thing as well. And it started out, as with really good reasoning. The FDA started with really good reasoning. People were dying from
Yeah.
poisoned food and shit, but they go a little too far, and they just get bored and need to find more and more new regulations for us.
Mission creep.
Yep.
And I wanted to comment too on this. Somebody mentioned, freedom, 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 right? Like that's a very American thing that we, chant freedom and talk about freedom, and we're the freest country in the world. And, both sides tend to do that, right? But I think that when people talk about supporting freedom and like America's core principles being freedom, I think that too often what they really mean is that they want to preserve the choice that they want to make, because they think that others will or should make the same choices they do, right? But in actuality, that's a perversion of what freedom really means. Because preserving freedom means protecting people's right to choose, even and especially if that's not the same choice that you would make, right? I would say that being on the side of freedom requires you to actually, not only fight for what you think is right, but also for what you don't agree with, because the point is giving people that choice. right? You don't have to vape to support the rights of people who do. You don't have to use drugs to support the rights of people who do. You don't have to get an abortion to support the rights of people who do. But it doesn't require you, supporting freedom doesn't require you to personally agree with everybody's choices or endorse them or even make those choices yourselves. The only requirement is that you support their ability to do that, you know?
Absolutely. And I even get sort of like, I get a little, like, it makes me feel weird when I start seeing a lot of these lefties that are now wanting to ban hate speech. Well, I obviously hate speech as well. I mean, it's kind of like, it's just, it's this slippery slope where we want to ban things that we dislike, and some are worse than others, obviously. But I think if you're gonna fight for the freedoms, you got to fight for even those idiot racist freedoms as well.
Right. And I always get frustrated when people criticize organizations like the ACLU, for example, for defending, neo-Nazi types. But that is the fullest and purest form of supporting freedom, right? If you want to defend the First Amendment, you have to defend it for speech that you agree with and that you don't agree with, because that's the entire point. Putting aside what you want and passionately defending, the opposite side, not because you believe that, but because you don't. Like, that's what freedom is.
And the beauty of the First Amendment gives you the right to also, defend your position or argue against those opinions, those, statements from the other side. So when you start challenging that because you don't like what other people are saying, you're challenging your own right to your defense or your opinion or your statements.
Right.
And it's like, are you willing to sacrifice those in order to, stop this thing that you don't agree with? And that goes for all the topics we're discussing,
Well, and
reproductive rights.
the unfortunate thing throughout history is that, like, when you do start, even if it's for a noble cause originally, when you do start stripping certain freedoms, it usually the state can use that against you, down the road. So, like, if you start messing with the First Amendment because you don't like hate speech, I get it. I don't like hate speech either, but that protects a lot more than hate speech, and it's an opening for tyranny later on.
And I think that those same arguments tie in with bodily autonomy, right? Like, you may support it in this area, but not in this area. But the problem with not supporting it in, let's say, abortion, let's say you oppose, abortion, for example, or you oppose, drug use or legalizing or decriminalizing drugs. That opens up, this Pandora's box of, well, then, there are people out there that are going to use the same argument against vaping, for example, or against something that you do. So I think that people have to think a lot more carefully about, their stances, because there's a lot more overlap than they realize. And I think I saw a quote on Twitter the other day, and I can't remember it verbatim, but it was something to the effect of, like, an authoritarian government, you support what they're doing today, but I promise you tomorrow they won't support what you're doing. You know what I mean?
And even if someone, let's say you're completely anti-abortion, even if that's so, you should still be uneasy about this recent ruling, because it's a slippery slope, because the 14th has protected a lot of common sense things. And if and they use the exact same reasoning in those cases as they used in Roe. So, I mean, it's, even if you just don't care about that issue at all, you should still possibly concern that this could have some domino effect.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate for the strict anti-abortion people here. I'm not one. I support a woman's right to get an abortion if she chooses to. However, if you truly believe that abortion is murder, bodily autonomy is not going to be an argument.
I agree with that. If that's, then it's like it, because then they say it's affecting another. So that's where the the conversation gets.
Murder trumps bodily autonomy. So I don't entirely think that people have to support a right to abortion in order to support a right to use the drug that they choose, or all drugs, or any drugs, including nicotine. I don't think the two things necessarily go together. There can be different rationales for supporting or opposing one or the other.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, just to bring it back to, as you said, drugs or tobacco. I mean, tobacco is, like most things in this country, built on the backs of enslaved people. Right. And still, we have child labor issues around the world. If you're buying tobacco, you support, child labor practices, bad child labor. If you buy drugs, you're supporting murderous cartels. So certainly, I mean, I don't mean to trivialize it or draw some sort of weak parallel here, but just really as example of, how people can blow the issue up and come up with that justification to say that what you're doing is murder.
And there's truth to that, and that's why
now I'm gonna just step in really quick to say, like, if you buy drugs, you're supporting murderous cartels is not on the hand of the individual buying drugs. That is on the face of the countries and around the world that have criminalized this and forced that into those criminal markets.
That's what I was going to say,
because that is, I'm just going to flat out go right against that and say that is absolutely not on an individual in any way, shape, or form. Those cartels are in operation because of drug policy around the world, not because, to say me going down the street and buying an eighth of cocaine is supporting cartels in Colombia or something like that is absolutely absurd. That is
just to pull a completely improbable example out of your head.
Yeah, that's just.
What were you going to say, Danielle, before we get too far down the road?
I was going to say that, along the lines of what, Logan was sort of saying about, the counter to that in terms of the, abortion argument, if you believe that abortion is murder, right? Let's say that we are a person that thinks that. I think we have to look at why you think that. And I would say, for the most part, I think the idea that abortion is murder stems from a largely spiritual or religious belief, right? That life begins at conception, that sort of ideal.
Right.
But if you understand that that is in fact a religious belief, that is not a religious belief that I hold, for example. And so, saying that murder trumps, bodily autonomy, well, your interpretation of it being murder is your perhaps religious belief and is not shared by me. So again, that's another example of making it about something when that larger issue is highly dependent, like Logan's example of the government making it, illegal and therefore creating the cartels. Well, your religious beliefs are making that argument, and not everyone believes that.
Yeah, but religious beliefs are the foundation of lots of laws that we all share.
But separation of church and state is a fundamental pillar of this country.
That's not the same thing as using a certain set of religious beliefs as a foundation for laws. It doesn't mean that that the government is supporting that religion. So I'm just telling you that it's not. I'm not trying to make that argument. I'm just saying that if you believe that abortion is murder for whatever reason you believe it, you're unlikely to support bodily autonomy on that count.
I do. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I would say if you believe that because of your religion.
What's the difference why they believe it? They believe it, and so they fight for abortion to be declared murder.
Right, but intent matters here, right? Like if you're fighting for something because it's your religion and you feel that you need to oppress everyone else who does not agree with your religion.
I really don't think anybody puts it in those terms.
I mean, aren't those the terms though?
That I believe in my religion and so I will oppress everybody else?
Yeah, everyone else needs to believe the same thing that I believe.
Well, it's a matter of perspective, right? So,
correct.
I think all sects of Christianity have some evangelical component to them, and it is to save the unwashed masses. And so what you or what someone on the receiving end might perceive as oppression, someone following their religious beliefs and doctrine will think more in terms of liberation.
Yeah, and
Right,
that's what
but
I was going to say.
it wasn't until like 6 years after Roe v. Wade, the decision came through, that the evangelicals and even Baptists started opposing it.
I'm not even
Historically, they were neutral or supportive of it.
I'm not even talking about organized religions and Roe v. Wade. I'm just saying that people who believe abortion is murder are going to think that murder trumps bodily autonomy, because murder is against the law everywhere, for everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just to throw this in, just because I was raised in a very strict religion, when you're raised that way, you don't think this is my opinion and everyone else has that their opinion. You think I know the truth and everyone else is misled or doesn't know
Sure.
what the fuck they're thinking, right? So if these people absolutely 100% think about this issue in black and white, that it is murder and that they need to stop it and stop everyone from doing it because
It's murder.
they're doing God's work. So it's like they don't view it as they're oppressing others, even though I understand that that's the effect, but they don't view it as they're oppressing others with their own religious opinions.
Sure, of course not. And Matt Myers doesn't believe that he's oppressing anyone.
No, and that's exactly, and there's a lot of religious kind of undertones to some of these health groups, and even the way that they operate. And you could even a lot of, not to get too far off, but like progressivism, which I consider myself to be a progressive, just so you know, even though I'll diss on it, like sometimes it is in some ways its own sort of religion, because a lot of progressives are atheists and stuff anyway. So a lot of this is just where we kind of my brain's getting fucked up here, but I'm basically trying to say, like, we're all programmed to think a certain way.
Correct.
Yeah, and tobacco control gets really, puritanical, right? Like nobody should use this, and we're, protecting the children. I mean, a lot of these themes get a little repetitive, right?
There's a really good comparison you could make between the tobacco control people protecting children and the conservatives that are protecting unborn children, in that neither of them care about the children once they become adults or once they become born. So
Well,
the
some of them.
tobacco control people lose total interest in the children once they turn, majority age. They can go ahead and smoke or do whatever they want. They're a filthy addict. And the anti-abortion people don't really give a damn about children once they're born.
Right.
I read a really interesting thing that talked about, specifically related to the unborn, but it affects, children as well, right? When people sort of use that in defense of things that they want to do. I mean, it's so easy to, defend the unborn or the children because they're so innocent, right? But as soon as they are born or grow up, then they start making choices, and then, they're not always purely defensible, right? It's more difficult. They have flaws, they make mistakes, they do different things. But this, perfect, virgin idea of the unborn or the small child who's innocent, that's what people like to rally around because it's easy, right? And they always age out. So you're always recycled with new, people, or if you will, that you're defending. So it's kind of, it's a shortcut.
Right.
There's this other thing, and I promised that I would try to work this in here somehow, but the idea that saving the children is the best possible course of action, in a way, maintaining that purity, if you will, throughout the rest of someone's life. First of all, I have to backtrack here, and this is going to be long, but one of my most memorable conversations in a bar, which is saying something, was with another person who said, the rule about no eating meat on Mondays, it's like a Catholic thing, right? That is an example of religious doctrine as early public health code. So for all of the like small government like pro-church folks out there, just keep in mind you are following a set of codified ordinances in your religious doctrine to some extent, and that being a basis for things like public health code. I guess it's no surprise that our public health people, researchers, policymakers, public health officials are all sort of grasping at this. I think it's very realistic to say unattainable level of purity that we're supposed to take forward through life, if I guess we're lucky, or if the policies, or if there weren't evil in the world like tobacco companies. I'm getting to another point here, which was Carl Phillips has blogged about this before, that when we compare this risky behavior of smoking to substance use or whatever, or things, and how harm reduction plays a role. One of the things he compares it to is sex, and that we know that the abstinence only approach does not work in preventing teenage pregnancies or transmitting STDs and so on. So we have adopted a harm reduction approach there, making contraception available to people while it's still available. As I understand it, there is legislation introduced somewhere to outlaw contraception, which is a really dumb idea. And then that idea that you're going to keep children pure into adulthood has also apparently failed in the tobacco control world. With all of this emphasis on preventing young people from quitting smoking, the analysis has to look at, is that sustained? Is that actually carrying through as people become young adults? And a piece of research I had read earlier looked at it and said, no, actually, it's not working. People are just, when they get to whatever the legal purchase age is or legal sales age, that's when we are actually seeing a significant portion of people initiating tobacco use in their 20s as young adults. And so that this one particular study, and I'm sorry I don't have it at my fingertips, is showing that the policies aren't actually helping to deter people. They're just starting later in life. I don't exactly know where I was going with that, but most of that is sort of focused on the abstinence only and this idea of maintaining someone's purity from youth into adulthood.
Right. I think I remember that study, and I think it was from the period before vaping.
No, actually, if the data they were looking at, and I don't remember what it was taken from, but it was up until, it was like 2002 to 2018.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What I was thinking of was one that showed a large number of kids actually starting to smoke in college. But I don't remember the details, so I won't try to talk about it. But it's a fact that a significant number of adolescents start smoking or vaping, I guess, after adolescence.
If I remember correctly, the age of initiation in China for smoking is actually much later than the United States. I want to say it's like 18, 19. So it's kind of interesting how these, you can almost use it as an example of like, okay, well, we're doing this here and they're just starting later. And whatever they're doing, elsewhere, they're still just starting later. So is this idea, like, Alex was saying, of trying to keep everybody pure, like it doesn't work regardless of really what you do, because that's not how humans work.
It seems like in China, there's they're not as anti-cigarette as we are here, of course, but it seems to be like a rite of passage into adulthood or something. I perhaps they.
And isn't it like way more common with men or some as
Oh
well?
yeah,
Sorry if somebody said that already, but
and that's the case a lot of places.
yeah, like especially in some of the Asian countries, I think it's like you said, it's a rite of passage for the men, but
Exactly.
then look down upon it for the women to do it.
I mean, ultimately, it's kind of, I think as some of you have just sort of invoking this idea of rite of passage. I mean, substance use for me was very much rite of passage. It was, as a young person, I'm hanging out with the older people, and we're using the same drugs, and I'm being shepherded through this experience. Hopefully, they know what they're doing. But ultimately, the point being that we as just part of the human experience, we like to put things into and sometimes take things out of our bodies. And so there really is no standard of purity when it comes to the human experience. And I don't think any state legislature, federal government, or religious doctrine owns a definition of that.
Correct. And people have been attempting to alter their minds since time immemorial. It's just not something you can legislate.
Sure. I mean, really, the idea of prohibition against drugs is a relatively new concept in the history of humanity, just because it wasn't until I don't know, something like 2 or 3,000 BC.
Yeah, late
that
1800s, early 1900s was when we first started seeing the first anti-drug legislation.
Well, there's been anti-drug, laws or prohibitions around the world for thousands of years. We've seen that same thing with tobacco as well. This goes back in, BC. But when we look at the course of human history, really, people have been using drugs, like Jim said, since the dawn of man. Human beings have been altering their consciousness, and some people actually, there's some evidence to show a lot of good has come from that, particularly in the realm of psychoactive substances and psychedelics in regards to the development of the human brain through human history. But yeah,
and it's very
in the way
rare.
that we criminalize drug use now is really truly a relatively new thing.
Yeah, it's very, very rare throughout history where you ever see a substance that was once popular get completely killed off, unless there's a better alternative to that substance that has some of the same effects, but just doesn't, but it is stronger, better, safer,
I mean,
or
there have
whatever.
definitely been drugs, throughout time that we, just human beings, have kind of been like, no, that's actually, all of
Yeah,
the
but
effects are
like for
far worse
like
than any good.
did you listen to Ethan's podcast with
I have
or
not.
the one he did with what's the guy's name that he did it with? Alex or Jim?
Hamilton.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hamilton
no, I have
So,
Morris.
not yet.
like sometimes a drug will go away. So he brought up barbiturates and how he thought maybe if we did legalize a bunch of drugs, maybe we wouldn't legalize barbiturates. And part of the reason is because they're not used much anymore, because there are better drugs that are used for the same reason, which is benzos. Like, as far as, like, a little bit safer. They work a little better for this, for anxiety, and why people use them, so on and so forth. So, but I mean, you're still finding substances to treat these same, wants or urges that we all have. Whether it be you want a stimulant, or you want a downer or something to help with anxiety or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, the underlying reasons as to why human beings use drugs has really not changed. Society around them has changed. The stresses of everyday life has changed. But, the real underlying reasons as to why people use drugs were human. Yeah, like that hasn't changed at all. But yeah, you're right. I mean, barbiturates have really essentially gone away. And you're right, benzos have really taken the place there.
It's not even human. Animals also.
Animals do. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, animals use drugs.
And they don't go to prison for it.
They're just not as good at it as we are.
Yeah.
Well,
No,
I don't know. There might be some really cool shit that they're hiding
hey,
from us.
look, they don't criminalize each other for it, Jim. So
some trees have berries that survive into the winter, and they freeze on the tree, and they freeze and thaw and ferment. And you will occasionally see birds, like sometimes robins, but cedar waxwings, other berry-eating birds, just attack those trees, and some of the birds get loopy and fall down. And
sure.
Are they getting
I
drunk?
see
Are the
you. I
birds
see
getting
you.
drunk?
they're drunk on the
Yeah.
berry ferment.
I see that you've been taking the CDC's advice.
Yeah, but I want nicotine just as much when I'm
out there bird watching, Jim.
I've been doing that for 30 years. So
Is that how you quit smoking?
nope, didn't help at all.
From bodily autonomy to bird watching. That's what the title should have been.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I did share that international guidelines to bodily autonomy and drug use, or human rights and drug use, rather, in this thread for anybody who is curious to read through those. And there are so many ways that our autonomy is violated in regards to drug policy. One of the big things we talked about, the rights to privacy. That's part of the Constitution as well, and that gets violated under drug policy. And I can think back to, when I was when I was mandated through court to go to, a rehab center and would have to pee in a cup. And there was no privacy in that bathroom while somebody stands there and watches you,
Yeah.
unzip and urinate into a cup for them. That's just one small example of how our literal constitutional rights are violated
So
through
there is
policy.
a literal constitutional right to privacy. The right to privacy is something that was also manufactured out of the 14th Amendment. No, the word privacy is nowhere in the Constitution.
That's why the 14th is so important, and it shouldn't be fucked
Right.
with.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's very like the argument that, hey, abortion's not in the 14th and it's vague and it's not even why the amendment was written. They're not wrong, but there's it's such a vague amendment, and the essence of it is so vast that, like, so many different freedoms have fallen under that. So, like, if we start making that argument, it is scary, because you could literally make that argument with so many other things.
Well, all the amendments following the first 10 were added later to address shortcomings of the original Constitution.
Yeah.
So, I mean, everything in our day-to-day life is governed by a combination of the original founding fathers document and alterations we've made to it to fit life as it changes. And
Yeah, and that's why, just being an originalist, when the Constitution is over 200 years old, it just
yeah,
doesn't jive anymore, and you can't even be a consistent originalist, because they're none of them are.
well, what would being a true originalist mean? That you believe that black people are 3/5 of a
I
human?
mean, a true originalist would mean that you're only allowed to have guns if you're in a militia.
Right.
First off, I mean, if you really want to go brass tacks, like, yeah, I mean, you would have to apply all that stuff, and there would be a lot of people with less rights than today.
Correct.
And the idea that the founding fathers could even comprehend an understanding of what the internet is, it just makes me laugh.
Oh,
Yeah.
they knew about the internet.
Well, I mean, most
Al Gore told them.
constitutions have a lifespan of like 1 to 200 years. They don't last very long, because they do get outdated. But if you're going to keep the Constitution you have, which we have a fairly robust one, when in comparison, you have to be prepared to read it for the essence that it's giving off, right? Like, you got to just kind of be able to apply those principles to modern day.
Well, and that was the intention, that it was bare bones enough that you could add to it. It could expand or contract as necessary, and you could add, even add new principles to it if you needed to. But the basics of the Constitution that can't be violated are pretty simple stuff. It's not, you know what I mean? I mean, I'm not even sure what I'm saying here.
Well, the complexity comes with the interpretations, right?
It's easy enough to expand it without violating the core principles of the Constitution.
Yeah.
As long as you care about that. It's a good Constitution.
Well, it's 8:00. I assume I should be wrapping this up. Are there any kind of burning final thoughts here before we do the outro stuff?
No, but I did have a tweet that I saw last week amongst kind of all of this, um, reproductive rights debates, abortion rights debates. I don't know exactly who this person is, but we were talking earlier about kind of the left and the right, and you know, either way, Leela Cohen tweeted. It's a little bit of a thread. It's not very long, but I'm going to read through it because I think there's a lot to think about here, and I think the idea that we have the right who are very for overturning Roe v. Wade and the laws that they're trying to get enacted around abortion, and then like Jim said, these people no longer caring about these babies once they're born, and that's kind of the thread of this tweet. I think it'll give people some thought. She tweeted, "If it was about babies, we'd have excellent and free universal maternal care. You wouldn't be charged a cent to give birth, no matter how complicated your delivery was. If it was about babies, we'd have months and months of parental leave for everyone. If it was about babies, we'd have free lactation consultants, free diapers, free formula. If it was about babies, we'd have free and excellent child care from newborns on. If it was about babies, we'd have universal preschool and pre-K guaranteed after school placements. If it was about babies, IVF and adoption wouldn't just be for folks with thousands and thousands of dollars to spend on expanding their families. It's not about babies. It's about punishing women and all people with uteruses and controlling our bodies." And I think that's an excellent kind of summation. Like Jim said, these you know, whether it be about prohibition or about abortion rights or whatever the case may be, it's such a cause to rally a base around an ideology, that then after that fact, after whatever that is passes, whether it's somebody who moves on or somebody, after we've arrested the drug user, what then? All of those kind of things, that goes to the wayside because those aren't the things that are going to, sorry, I have a motorcycle outside my window, rally the base, get votes, things like that. But that's not the hot button topic. What happens to these children after they're born, after they're, brought into the world. So.
Yeah, and I think consistent with what I mentioned earlier, it's things that we've been saying is that the parallels here for everything is once if that child does come to become a child, reaches a certain age, it's no longer the focus, and it's sort of you're on your own, kid. But I think as
Sure, and we don't
illustrated
see,
there, even before then, you're kind of on your own, kid.
Yeah, we don't see Matt Myers launching, campaign for tobacco-free adults, campaign for tobacco-free senior citizens. Once you reach the I guess now the age of 21, after that, we no longer care about you. You're not useful to us. You're not useful to our agenda. You're not useful, for raising money, things like that. So.
Well, it's hard to create a moral panic about adults.
Sure. I mean, we've been in an overdose crisis for years now, mainly with adults. And you can see how slowly that's, gaining any real progression there as far as things being done. So.
But it's all totally disingenuous because even the, ban the vape flavors for the kids doesn't prevent vaping, doesn't prevent smoking, doesn't prevent anything. All it does is hurt the adults who really find use in these products.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
I think if there's one thing that I could leave people with, it would be to, when you're thinking about certain issues, especially, politically charged or religiously charged issues, consider bodily autonomy. Consider, how you feel about the issue if it was reversed or if it was on a different topic. Instead of vaping, what if it was vaccines? Instead of vaccines, what if it was drugs? Instead of drugs, what if it was, sex work, for example? We didn't even get into that. There are so many ways that this, idea plays out. And there's so many ways that, individuals and government can infringe on people's freedoms. And if you really are, or purport to be a defender of freedom, I would just challenge everybody, because it's a good mental exercise, to just always consider, if the shoe were on the other foot, how would you feel about it? I think doing that makes us a better society. So that would be what I would leave people with.
Very good.
Yeah, and you want to talk about something that's been around since the dawn of man, dawn of humanity, sex work.
Yeah,
Talk about
I'm surprised we didn't bring that up. I totally forgot about it. That's like, we could talk about that for a whole nother hour.
yeah, we could, but it is already 5 after 8, so yeah,
We've hit our quota. So
All right.
we have hit our quota.
Anyway, all good thoughts to end on, and I don't know. I hope this was informative, perhaps challenging for folks listening, and I think it's always instructive to see how our specific issue relates to others. Obviously, we've been doing a lot of that with talking about the parallels and intersections with drug policy, but certainly other either morally motivated or public health motivated issues that are not directly related to tobacco or drug use. Certainly a lot of connections there, and some instruction and just thinking about it critically. So thank you to all of our board members who joined tonight. Again, Danielle, Matt, Jim, and Logan. Thanks for the folks who stuck around and listened to this live. Phil, I see you. And this person, Judy G. Hey, thanks for sticking around. And some others who filtered in and out throughout the hour. We very much appreciate it. For those interested, you can catch this and other audio recordings that CASAA Gang does on our SoundCloud. And also, we usually post links to that on our Friday blog post, which you can get by checking out our website at casaa.org. Follow us on the social medias at CASAA Media. I think that's the handle across all of the Facebook, Insta, Twitter. We're not on the other things. And if you are around on Saturday afternoon, 4:30 Eastern, we'll be having a conversation with Guy Bentley this weekend. And I think we'll probably be paying particular attention to the menthol and flavored cigar ban that FDA is working on. Also, be on the lookout for CASAA's call to action to get engaged with the comment period on that. Hopefully, we'll have that up in the next day or two. And with that, thank you again, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you back here in 2 weeks. All right. Thanks. Good night.